The vampire king looked down at the small girl clinging to his leg and felt something inside him go dangerously still. She was calling him Daddy, with such bright certainty that everyone in the throne room had frozen in place. He was Aleksandr Dravonis, ruler of the northern vampire court for 3 centuries, and he had never, in all those years, found himself in a situation quite like this. The child, no more than 4 years old with dark curls and eyes the color of warm honey, pressed her cheek against the fine fabric of his trousers and refused to let go. Her small fingers clutched at him with a determination that would have been admirable if it weren't so utterly inconvenient. "Daddy," she said again, and the word echoed through the vast chamber like a bell toll. Alexander's pale eyes shifted to the woman standing several feet away, the maid who had brought the child into his presence. She was young, perhaps 25. With auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and an expression of absolute mortification coloring her features. Her name tag read Willow Carstairs, and she looked like she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. "I am so sorry, Your Majesty," Willow stammered, rushing forward to try and pry her daughter's hands away. "Elena, let go right now. He's not pleased, sweetheart." But Elena held on tighter, and Alexander found himself in the bizarre position of having to stand perfectly still while 2 humans struggled at his feet. His courtiers watched with barely concealed fascination. This was, after all, unprecedented. The vampire king was known for many things: his strategic brilliance, his absolute authority, his cold precision in matters of blood law, but never for his patience with human children. "Elena Rose Carstairs," Willow said, her voice taking on the desperate edge of a parent at the end of her rope. "You need to let go this instant." "But it's Daddy," Elena insisted, tilting her head back to look up at Alexander with such trust and joy that something uncomfortable shifted in his chest. "Daddy came back." Ah, there it was. The child thought he was someone else. Alexander's jaw tightened fractionally. He knew he should correct her, should speak the words that would shatter this innocent delusion. But the girl's absolute certainty gave him pause. How did one tell a child that her father, whoever he had been, was not coming back? Willow finally managed to loosen Elena's grip, lifting her daughter into her arms despite the child's protests. "I'm so sorry," she said again, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I shouldn't have brought her here. The other staff said it would be okay, that you wanted to meet everyone who worked in the estate, and I didn't have anyone to watch her today. I never imagined she would—" "It's Daddy!" Elena wailed, reaching out toward Alexander with both hands. "Mama, you said Daddy would come home. You promised." The words hung in the air like shards of broken glass. Alexander watched the color drain from Willow's face, watched her hold her daughter closer as if she could physically shield her from the truth. Around them, the court remained silent. This was meant to be a routine acknowledgement of new household staff, a formality that took mere minutes. Instead, it had become something rawer, more human than this place usually allowed. "Leave us," Alexander said quietly, and the command rippled through the room. His courtiers filed out with practiced grace, though he could feel their curiosity burning as bright as flame. Within moments, only 3 figures remained in the throne room: a vampire king, a mortified maid, and a little girl who refused to stop crying. Willow clutched Elena tighter, backing toward the door. "We'll go. I'll pack my things. I understand if you want to terminate my employment. This was completely inappropriate." "Stay." The word came out harder than Alexander intended, and Willow froze mid-step. He descended from his throne, moving with the fluid grace that marked his kind, until he stood close enough to see the fine tremor running through the maid's frame. She smelled of chamomile and vanilla, and underneath that, fear. Not terror, but the low-grade anxiety of someone desperately trying to hold their life together. "Your daughter," he said carefully. "She resembles me, I take it? Her father?" Willow's eyes widened. "No, I mean—" She stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "She's never met her father. He left before she was born. But I showed her pictures, and Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He had pale hair, pale skin. I didn't realize how much you would look like. I never thought she would—" "Make the connection," Alexander finished. He studied the child, who had quieted somewhat, but still watched him with those luminous honey eyes. The resemblance must be striking to her. "I told her stories," Willow admitted, and now a single tear did slip down her cheek. "I told her that her daddy was a prince who lived far away, that he loved her very much but couldn't be with us. I know I shouldn't have lied, but she's so young and I couldn't bear to tell her the truth. That we weren't important enough for him to stay. The rawness in her voice caught Aleksandr off guard. He had seen countless humans over his long existence, had witnessed every shade of emotion they possessed, but something about this woman's fierce protectiveness over her daughter resonated in a way he didn't quite understand. She was trying so hard to shield her child from pain, building fairy tales out of absence and loss. How old? He asked. 4. She just turned 4 last month. And your employment here? How long? 3 weeks. I was hired as part of the housekeeping staff for the estate's west wing. I work nights usually when Elena is asleep, but today the schedule's changed and I couldn't find childcare in time, so I thought... Willow broke off, shaking her head. I'm sorry, I'll go. No. Aleksandr surprised himself with the firmness of his refusal. He could feel the child's eyes on him, could sense her small heart beating rabbit fast with hope and confusion. You will stay. Your employment is secure. But, however, he continued, his voice taking on the weight of authority that came naturally to him, if you are to work in this household, especially with a child present, certain truths must be understood. This is not a human estate. The staff knows what I am, what we are. Your daughter is young, but she will need to learn discretion. She won't tell anyone, Willow said quickly. I'll make sure she understands not to talk about any of this. Aleksandr nodded slowly. The logical thing would be to dismiss them both, to avoid the complication entirely. He had no need for a maid with a small child, no use for the disruption this situation would inevitably cause. And yet he found himself saying, you may bring her with you when necessary. There are rooms in the estate that could be made suitable for a child while you work. Willow stared at him as if he'd just offered her the moon. Your Majesty, I thank you. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet, he said with a hint of dry humor. You may come to regret this arrangement when your daughter realizes I am definitively not her father. But even as he said it, Elena reached out again, her small voice soft and certain. Daddy. Something in Aleksandr's chest constricted. He had been many things over 3 centuries: warrior, king, judge, executioner. But never a father, never anything close to it. The very idea was absurd. And yet, as he watched Willow carry her daughter toward the door, he found himself adding, 3 nights from now, bring her to the East Garden at sunset. There are flowers there that bloom at dusk. Children find them fascinating. Willow turned back, her expression caught between shock and something that looked dangerously close to hope. You don't have to. I'm aware of what I do and do not have to do, Aleksandr said coolly. Consider it a courtesy. Your daughter has had an emotionally difficult day. Perhaps a small kindness would not be amiss. It was a dismissal and an invitation all at once, and Willow seemed to recognize it as such. She nodded, pressing her lips to Elena's temple, and then they were gone, the door closing softly behind them. Aleksandr stood alone in his throne room, surrounded by centuries of history and power, and wondered what in the name of ancient blood he had just agreed to. 3 nights later, Willow arrived at the East Garden with Elena perched on her hip, both of them dressed in simple cotton dresses that spoke of careful maintenance and limited means. Aleksandr watched them approach from the garden center, where night-blooming jasmine had just begun to unfurl their white petals beneath the rising moon. The garden was one of his private spaces, rarely shown to anyone outside his inner circle, and bringing humans here was unprecedented. But he had given his word, and a vampire's word was binding in ways humans could never fully comprehend. Your Majesty, Willow said, setting Elena down but keeping a firm grip on her hand. The child's eyes went wide as she took in the garden, the luminous flowers, the reflecting pools that caught starlight like captured dreams, the ancient stone pathways that wound between beds of impossible blooms. This is breathtaking. It was designed by a court gardener 4 centuries ago, Aleksandr said, moving toward them with deliberate slowness. He had learned that sudden movements frighten human children, and while he found Elena's mistake about his identity frustrating, he had no desire to terrify her. Many of these plants exist nowhere else in the world. They thrive only in darkness. Elena tugged on her mother's hand. Can I touch? Willow looked to Aleksandr, who nodded. The white flowers, nothing red, nothing with thorns. The child immediately ran to the nearest cluster of jasmine, her delighted laugh echoing through the garden like music. Willow followed more slowly, keeping herself positioned between her daughter and the Vampire King in a way that Aleksandr recognized as instinctive protection. This woman might be awed by his power, might depend on his employment, but she would defend her child if necessary. He respected that, even as it amused him. What did she think she could do against a creature like him? "Why are you doing this?" Willow asked quietly, watching Elena explore the flowers with careful, gentle touches. "You could have fired me. You could have had us removed from the estate entirely. Instead, you're showing my daughter a magical garden." Aleksandr was silent for a long moment. He hadn't fully examined his own motivations, and he found the introspection uncomfortable. "Your daughter made an honest mistake based on limited information," he finally said. "Punishing ignorance serves no purpose, and perhaps," he paused, choosing his words with rare care, "perhaps I am curious. Curious? About what makes a mother lie to her child about a father who abandoned them. About what makes a little girl so certain of love that she will embrace a stranger." His pale eyes fixed on Willow, and he saw her swallow hard. "About what kind of man leaves a woman pregnant and alone." "He wasn't—" Willow started, then stopped. She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm evening air. "He wasn't a bad man, just a young one. We were both young, 19, barely adults ourselves. When I told him I was pregnant, he panicked, said he wasn't ready to be a father, that we barely knew each other, that it was a mistake." Her voice went hollow. "He offered me money for an abortion. When I said no, he left. I haven't seen him since." "His name?" "Why does it matter?" "It matters," Aleksandr said softly, "because I am trying to understand what kind of coward abandons his own blood." Willow's laugh was bitter. "His name was James Patterson. He's probably in California now, living his best life without ever thinking about what he left behind." She looked at Elena, and her expression transformed into something fierce and tender all at once. "But I wouldn't change anything. Not if it meant losing her." Aleksandr found himself studying Willow more closely. She was pretty in an understated way, warm brown eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose, a mouth that looked like it smiled often despite current circumstances. She was also exhausted. He could see it in the shadows beneath her eyes, in the tension that never quite left her shoulders. A single mother working nights to provide for her child, spinning fairy tales to protect a young heart from harsh truths. "Daddy!" Elena called out, waving at him from across the garden. "Come see, the flowers are glowing." Willow winced. "Elena, sweetie, we talked about this, remember? It's fine." Aleksandr interrupted. He moved toward the child, his long coat trailing behind him like liquid shadow. When he reached Elena, he crouched down to her eye level, bringing his face close to hers. "These are called moonflowers. They glow because they absorb starlight. If you're very quiet and very patient, sometimes you can hear them sing." Elena's mouth formed a perfect O of wonder. "Really? Really?" It wasn't quite true, but it wasn't quite a lie either. Vampires could hear things humans couldn't, the slow song of growing things, the whisper of shadows. To him, the flowers did sing. "Would you like to try?" The little girl nodded eagerly, and Aleksandr found himself sitting in the grass, something he hadn't done in at least a century, with a 4-year-old pressed against his side, both of them listening to the garden's night song. Willow stood nearby, her expression unreadable but her posture slightly less tense. After several minutes, Elena whispered, "I don't hear anything." "That's because you're not listening with the right ears," Aleksandr said. He tapped her chest gently, just above her heart. "Try listening here instead." Elena closed her eyes, her small face scrunched in concentration. Aleksandr glanced up at Willow and found her watching them with such raw emotion that it stopped whatever cold observation he was about to make. She looked like a woman witnessing something she'd thought her daughter would never have a father figure, a patient and present, sharing magic and wonder. The weight of that unspoken need settled over Aleksandr like a mantle he hadn't asked to wear. "I hear it," Elena gasped, her eyes flying open. "It sounds like humming." "Exactly so," Aleksandr said, even though he knew what she was hearing was simply her own pulse, her own life thrumming through her small body. "But wasn't that its own kind of magic? You have good ears." Elena beamed at him, and then, without warning or permission, she threw her arms around his neck and hugged him with all the fierce, uncomplicated love that only a child could possess. "Thank you, Daddy." Aleksandr's hands hovered uncertainly in the air. He should correct her, should explain gently but firmly that he was not and could never be her father. should establish boundaries before the situation became even more complicated than it already was. Instead, he found his arms settling around the small girl, holding her with a carefulness that surprised him. She was so fragile, so terribly, terrifyingly fragile. He could feel every bird fast beat of her heart, could smell the innocent sweetness of her blood beneath skin that had never known violence or fear. One wrong move, and he could hurt her without even meaning to, but he didn't. He held her gently until she pulled back with a satisfied sigh, and then he stood, brushing grass from his coat with fingers that were not quite steady. "It's getting late," Willow said softly. "We should go. Elena needs her sleep." "Of course." Alexander nodded, his composure reassembling itself like armor. "You may use the garden whenever you wish, provided it's after sunset. I'll inform the guards." "Your Majesty, Willow hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Thank you, not just for the garden, but for understanding, for being kind to her." "I am not kind," Alexander said more sharply than he intended. "Do not mistake tolerance for kindness, Miss Carstairs. I am allowing this because it amuses me and because your daughter is innocent of any wrongdoing. But I am not the man she believes me to be. The sooner she understands that, the better for everyone involved." Willow's expression shuddered, and Alexander felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been regret. But before he could examine it, she had taken Elena's hand and was leading her toward the garden's exit, murmuring soft reassurances to the child. "Willow," he called out, using her first name for the first time. She turned back, surprised. "Your shift tomorrow night, you'll be working the North Wing?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Bring Elena to the library instead. There are books there with pictures. She can read while you work nearby." He didn't wait for her response, turning on his heel and striding back into the depths of the garden, away from the temptation of the maid's grateful eyes and the child's innocent trust. He was Aleksandr Dravonis, vampire king of the Northern Court. He did not involve himself in the domestic troubles of human employees. He did not soften toward children who called him daddy with such devastating certainty. And yet, as he stood among his night-blooming flowers, he couldn't quite banish the memory of small arms around his neck, or the fierce protectiveness in a mother's eyes, or the strange, uncomfortable warmth that had settled somewhere in the vicinity of his long-dormant heart. The weeks that followed established an unexpected routine. Willow worked her shifts while Elena occupied whatever space Alexander had deemed appropriate for that evening. The library, with its floor-to-ceiling books, the music room with its grand piano that she was forbidden to touch but allowed to listen to, the portrait gallery where she would stare at centuries of vampire nobility and ask endless questions that Alexander found himself answering despite his better judgment. He told himself he was simply being pragmatic. A happy, occupied child meant a focused employee. Willow was actually a skilled maid, efficient and thorough in her work, and replacing her would be more trouble than accommodating her daughter's occasional presence. It was logical. It was reasonable. It was, he was beginning to suspect, complete nonsense. The truth was considerably more complicated and significantly more dangerous. He was beginning to care. Not in any grand, world-altering way, but in small moments that accumulated like snow before an avalanche. The way Elena would carefully sound out words in the picture books he'd provided, her tongue poking out in concentration. The way Willow would glance at him with gratitude and something else he didn't dare name. The way they both treated him not as a king or a monster, but simply as someone who had earned their trust. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Tell me about the blood laws," Willow said one evening, her voice cutting through his thoughts. They were in the library, Elena asleep on a nest of cushions Willow had constructed, and the maid was supposed to be dusting the upper shelves. Instead, she was standing on a ladder, looking down at him with open curiosity. Alexander set down the treaty he'd been reviewing. "Why?" "Because I work in a vampire estate, and my daughter spends time around you and your court, and I want to understand the rules that govern your world. I need to know how to keep her safe." Willow's directness was something he'd come to appreciate. She didn't dance around difficult topics or simper with false flattery. She asked real questions and expected real answers. "The blood laws are complex," he said carefully. "But the most relevant one for your situation is this. No vampire may feed from a human child ever, under any circumstances. The penalty is final death, immediate and absolute. And from adults? Consensual feeding is permitted. Forced feeding is punishable by centuries of imprisonment or execution, depending on severity." He paused. "You're safe here, Willow. Both of you. My court knows the laws, and more than that, they know my word. I have declared you both under my protection." Willow climbed down from the ladder, moving to stand closer to him. She smelled like lemon polish and that underlying chamomile scent he'd come to associate with her. "When did you do that?" "The first night, after Elena—" He stopped, something tightening in his throat. "After she called me Daddy in front of the entire court. I couldn't have rumors spreading, couldn't have other vampires seeing her as a curiosity or a target. So I marked you both as mine to protect. Yours," Willow repeated, and there was something in her voice that made Alexander's eyes snap to hers. They were standing very close now, close enough that he could hear her pulse kick up, could smell the slight spike of adrenaline that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite calm either. "Under my protection," he clarified, putting deliberate distance into his tone even as he didn't step back. Nothing more. "Right, of course." Willow's cheeks colored slightly, and she turned away, busying herself with straightening already straight books. "I didn't mean to presume, quote, Willow." He said her name like a command and a caress all at once, and she froze. "Look at me." She did, and Alexander felt the full weight of his mistake settle over him. Because looking into her warm brown eyes, he could no longer pretend that this was simple pragmatism or idle curiosity. He wanted her. Not just her blood, though the temptation of that was a constant hum beneath his skin. He wanted her trust, her smiles, her fierce protective instincts, and her gentle hands. He wanted her in ways that vampires were not supposed to want humans, in ways that complicated everything. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "and I need you to listen carefully." Willow nodded, her eyes wide but unafraid. "I am 317 years old. I have ruled this court for most of that time. I have seen empires rise and fall, have witnessed humanity change itself 1,000 times over. I am not human, Willow. I never was. My kind are predators, and no matter how civilized we appear, that fundamental truth never changes." He took a breath he didn't need. "You and Elena have been coming here for 6 weeks. In that time, I have found myself thinking about you both when I shouldn't, worrying about you, wanting—" He stopped, jaw tight. "Wanting things I have no right to want." "What things?" Willow asked, her voice barely audible. "A life I can't have, a family I don't deserve, a chance to be the man your daughter already believes I am." The admission cost him. He could feel it like a wound. "But I am not that man, Willow. I am a vampire king with enemies who would use you to hurt me with a nature that makes me dangerous no matter my intentions. The honorable thing would be to send you away before this becomes something neither of us can walk away from." Willow was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his cold skin, alive in a way that made his chest ache. "I was 19 when I got pregnant," she said softly. 19 and scared and so certain that I'd ruined my entire life. James left, and my parents said I was on my own, that I'd made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. I spent my entire pregnancy working 3 jobs, sleeping in my car sometimes because I couldn't afford both rent and food. When Elena was born, I held her and promised her that I would never let anyone make her feel unwanted, that she would always have a home, always have love, always have someone fighting for her. Willow. I've kept that promise, she continued, her grip on his hand tightening, but it's been so hard, so impossibly hard. And then, 6 weeks ago, my daughter made an innocent mistake and called a vampire king Daddy, and instead of being angry or cruel, you were kind. You showed her magic. You gave her books and safe spaces and patience I didn't know existed. You made her feel special instead of like a burden. Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back stubbornly. So when you say you want things you can't have, I understand. Because I look at you and I see everything I've tried to be for Elena, strong and protective and certain, and I wonder what it would be like to have someone be those things for me. For us? Alexander felt something crack inside him, some carefully maintained wall crumbling beneath the weight of her honesty. I could hurt you, he said hoarsely. Not intentionally, but my world is dangerous. My enemies would see you as a weakness. Your enemies already know we exist. You said you declared us under your protection. That means people know you care. Willow stepped closer, looking up at him with those devastating eyes. And for the first time in 5 years, I feel like maybe it's okay to let someone else be strong too. Maybe it's okay to want something for myself instead of only for my daughter. This is madness, Aleksandr said, but even as he spoke, his free hand was rising to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with a gentleness that surprised them both. Maybe, Willow agreed, but night, it's the best kind of madness, the kind that feels like hope. And then, because she was braver than any human he'd ever met, she rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and entirely too brief, but it detonated through Aleksandr like starlight breaking through eternal night. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with 3 centuries of longing he hadn't known he possessed. And for a moment, the world narrowed to just this, her warmth, her trust, her absolute absence of fear. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Aleksandr rested his forehead against hers and said the most honest thing he'd said in decades. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. Then we'll figure it out together, Willow whispered, one day at a time. From her nest of cushions, Elena stirred slightly, murmuring "Daddy" in her sleep, and Aleksandr felt the last of his resistance shatter like glass. He was, he realized, irreversibly lost. The court reacted to the development with predictable chaos. Alexander's second in command, Lucian Valerius, cornered him in the throne room 3 days after that kiss in the library, his expression caught between concern and disbelief. "Tell me it isn't true," Lucian said without preamble. "Tell me you haven't actually formed an attachment to the human maid and her child." Aleksandr didn't look up from the document he was reviewing. "I can't tell you that. For blood's sake, Aleksandr." Lucian dragged a hand through his silver white hair, a gesture of frustration that was remarkable only because Lucian was rarely frustrated. "Do you understand what you're risking? The Southern Court has been looking for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to challenge your rule. If they learn you've developed feelings for humans, then they will learn that I am not to be trifled with regardless of my personal attachments," Aleksandr interrupted, finally meeting his oldest friend's eyes. "I did not maintain power for 3 centuries by being weak, Lucian. My regard for Willow and Elena does not change that." "It changes everything," Lucian countered. "You've always been careful. Always kept yourself separate from the kind of emotional entanglements that could be exploited. And now you're doing exactly what our enemies would want, giving them leverage." "They already have leverage," Aleksandr said quietly. "The moment I declared them under my protection, the moment I allowed Elena to call me daddy without correction, I made my position clear. Distancing myself now wouldn't undo that. It would only prove that I can be manipulated, that my protection means nothing." Lucian studied him for a long moment. "You're in love with her." It wasn't a question, but Aleksandr answered anyway. "I don't know what I am. I know that when I'm with them, I feel something I haven't felt in centuries, something that makes this endless existence seem worthwhile again." He set down his pen, giving Lucian his full attention. "I know that sounds foolish to you. It sounds dangerous," Lucian corrected. "But not foolish. I've known you for 200 years. Aleksandr, I've never seen you care about anything beyond duty and power. If this human and her child can give you something more, then perhaps," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Perhaps it's worth the risk, but you need to be prepared for the consequences. The Southern Court won't let this pass unchallenged. Let them come," Aleksandr said, and there was enough cold steel in his voice to make even Lucian take a step back. "Any vampire who threatens what's mine will learn exactly why I've held power for 3 centuries. They will learn, Lucian, in ways that leave no room for doubt." Lucian nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He smiled. "The maid must be remarkable to inspire such devotion." "She is," Aleksandr said simply. "They both are." But even as he spoke, a cold dread settled in his gut, because Lucian was right about one thing. The Southern Court would see this as an opportunity, and Aleksandr's enemies were neither stupid nor merciful. He would need to be ready. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when Willow was working the East Wing and Elena was asleep in what had become her room, a small chamber near the library that Aleksandr had furnished with child-sized furniture and more picture books than any 4-year-old needed. He was in his study, reviewing security reports, when the alarm bells began to ring. Aleksandr was moving before conscious thought engaged, his body flowing through the estate's corridors like smoke. He knew instantly where the threat was focused, could feel it in the sudden spike of fear that emanated from the east wing, could hear Willow scream cutting through the night like a blade. He found them in Elena's room. 3 vampires he didn't recognize, mercenaries probably, hired by the Southern Court to send a message. Willow was on the floor, bleeding from a gash on her temple, positioned between the attackers and her daughter. Elena was pressed against the wall, crying but alive, and the sight of them both in danger sent something primal surging through Aleksandr's veins. "Step away from them," he said, his voice dropping to a register that humans couldn't hear, but that made the 3 vampires freeze instantly. "Step away, or I will show you exactly what it means to anger a king." The largest of the vampires turned, baring teeth in what was meant to be intimidation. "The Southern Court sends its regards, Aleksandr. They want you to know that your human pets are—" He didn't get to finish. Aleksandr moved with speed that made him nearly invisible, his hand closing around the vampire's throat and lifting him off the ground. "You attacked a child," he said, each word precise and deadly. "You violated the oldest law of our kind. Your life is forfeit." "She's just a human," the vampire choked out. "Just a—" Aleksandr snapped his neck with casual efficiency, letting the body drop. The other 2 vampires backed away, their bravado evaporating in the face of his cold fury. But there would be no mercy here. They had threatened what was his. They had made Willow bleed. They had terrified Elena. They had signed their own death warrants. What followed was brutal and absolute. Aleksandr didn't simply kill them, he made an example of them, ending their existence with a finality that would be felt throughout the vampire world. By the time Lucian and the guards arrived, the threat was over, and Aleksandr was kneeling beside Willow, his hands gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. "Let me see," he murmured, carefully tilting her head to examine the wound. It was bleeding, but not deep, would heal cleanly with proper care. "You're all right. You're both all right. Elena!" Willow tried to rise, but Aleksandr held her steady. "Is safe. I promise." He looked over at the little girl, who was still pressed against the wall, her eyes huge with shock and fear. "Elena, sweetheart, come here." For the first time since they'd met, Elena hesitated. She'd just watched him kill 3 beings with his bare hands, had seen the monster that lurked beneath his civilized exterior. Aleksandr felt that hesitation like a knife to the chest. "It's still me," he said softly. "I know I scared you, I know what you saw was frightening, but it's still me, and I will always, always protect you and your mama. I promise." Elena's lower lip trembled. Then, in a movement that nearly broke him, she launched herself across the room and into his arms, burying her face against his chest and sobbing. "They were mean. They hurt Mama." "I know, little one, I know." Aleksandr held her with infinite care, one arm around the child and the other helping Willow to her feet. "But they're gone now. You're safe." "Daddy kept us safe," Elena said into his shirt, and this time, Aleksandr didn't even think about correcting her. "Yes," Willow whispered, her hand finding his. "He did." The aftermath of the attack rippled through both courts. The Southern Court attempted to deny involvement, but Aleksandr had the bodies of the mercenaries analyzed, their blood memories extracted and displayed before the Council of Elders. The evidence was undeniable, and the political consequences were swift and severe. The Southern Court's leadership was stripped of 2/3 of their territory, their army reduced, their voting power in council matters all but eliminated. It was a clear message. Threatening what belonged to Aleksandr Dravonis carried consequences that not even ancient vampire politics could protect against. But the personal consequences were more complicated. "She won't sleep in her room anymore," Willow said quietly one evening, a month after the attack. They were in Aleksandr's private quarters, something that had become increasingly common as their relationship deepened. Elena was asleep in the next room, in a bed that had been moved there at her tearful insistence. "She has nightmares. Dreams that they come back." Aleksandr felt the guilt like acid. "I should have had better security. Should have anticipated our should." "Stop," Willow interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "You couldn't have known, and you saved us. Elena knows that. She needs time to feel safe again." I want to give her that, Aleksandr said roughly. I want to give you both everything, but I don't know if I can. My world is dangerous, Willow. That attack proved it. Maybe you would both be better off. Don't, she said fiercely. Don't you dare suggest we leave. We're not going anywhere, Aleksandr. This is our home now. She stopped, seeming to struggle with something. You're our family. The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them had quite been brave enough to voice until now. Family. It was such a human concept, warm and messy and complicated, and yet Aleksandr couldn't deny that it fit. In the 2 months since Elena had first called him daddy, he had become inextricably woven into their lives. He knew Elena's favorite bedtime stories, knew that Willow took her tea with honey and too much milk, knew the way they both looked when they laughed, heads thrown back, eyes bright with joy. He knew he would burn the world before he let anything hurt them again. Marry me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. Marry me, Willow. Let me be Elena's father in truth, not just in her imagination. Let me protect you both with more than just my power. Let me... He stopped, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was asking. Let me be your family. Willow stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in 3 centuries. Aleksandr took her hands, holding them carefully between his. I know this is fast. I know it's complicated. I know I'm not the safe choice or the easy one. But I love you, Willow. I love your daughter. I love the way you both have made this cold estate feel like a home. And I want... His voice cracked slightly. I want the chance to be the man Elena already believes I am. The man you make me want to be. Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks, but she was smiling. You're insane. Quite possibly. A vampire king and a single mother. This is going to be complicated. Undoubtedly. Elena will be thrilled. She's been asking when you're going to officially be her daddy. Willow laughed through her tears. She doesn't understand that there are steps involved, legal processes. I can expedite the legal processes, Aleksandr said, something fierce and hopeful stirring in his chest. Is that Willow? Is that a yes? Yes, she whispered, and then louder, more certain. Yes, I'll marry you. We'll be your family. Aleksandr kissed her then, pouring 3 centuries of loneliness and 2 months of love into the press of lips and the tangle of breath. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning, actually grinning, like a boy instead of a king. We should tell Elena in the morning, Willow said, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. She's going to be impossible. I look forward to it, Aleksandr said, and realized with a start that he meant it. He was looking forward to mornings and small hands sticky with breakfast, to picture books and patient explanations, to all the mundane, beautiful chaos that came with being a father. From the next room, he heard Elena stir, heard her sleepy voice call out, Daddy? I'll go, Aleksandr said, pressing a kiss to Willow's forehead before moving toward the door. He found Elena sitting up in bed, her hair a wild tangle, one of her stuffed animals clutched to her chest. Bad dream? He asked gently, settling on the edge of her bed. Elena nodded, then reached for him with both arms. Aleksandr gathered her up, holding her close as she pressed her ear to his chest. He knew what she was listening for, the heartbeat that wasn't there, the silence that marked him as different. But she didn't seem to mind. She just sighed, content, and nestled closer. You're cold, she said matter-of-factly. I am, Aleksandr agreed. Is that all right? Yeah, it's like an ice pack. Mama says ice packs help when you're scared. Elena yawned, her eyes already drooping closed again. I love you, Daddy. The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from lungs that didn't need air. 3 centuries of existence, and he had never heard those words directed at him with such simple, absolute trust. I love you too, little one, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I love you so very much. Elena was already asleep, but Aleksandr continued to hold her, continued to marvel at the strange, impossible gift he'd been given. A child who called him daddy despite having no obligation to do so. A woman who looked at him and saw not a monster, but a man worthy of love. A family when he'd long since given up hope of having one. When he finally laid Elena back down and returned to his own room, Willow was waiting, her eyes knowing and warm. You told her you loved her, she said softly. I did. Good. Willow held out her hand, and Aleksandr took it, letting her pull him down beside her. Because we love you too. Both of us. for exactly who you are. And Alexander, who had spent 3 centuries building walls around his heart, let the last of them crumble. Because sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let yourself be vulnerable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was love and allow yourself to be loved in return. The wedding took place 6 months later in the estate's great hall, with the entire northern court in attendance and a handful of carefully vetted human guests. Willow wore a dress of cream silk that made her look like something from a fairy tale, and Elena served as flower girl, scattering petals with solemn concentration and only a little bit of gleeful chaos. Alexander had worried about the ceremony, about whether he could stand in front of witnesses and make vows that meant forever in a way that only vampires truly understood. But when he looked at Willow, radiant in the candlelight, and at Elena, beaming from her place at the front, all his doubts evaporated. I, Aleksandr Dravonis, take you, Willow Rose Carstairs, to be my wife, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I vow to protect you and cherish you for all the days of your life. I vow to honor your humanity, your strength, your fierce mother's heart. And I vow to be a father to your daughter, to love her as my own, to guide her and protect her until my last breath. Willow was crying openly now, her hands trembling in his. I, Willow Rose Carstairs, take you, Aleksandr Dravonis, to be my husband. I vow to stand beside you, to trust in your protection, to help you navigate the human world you've been separated from for so long, and I vow to share my daughter's love with you because you've already earned the right to be called her father 1,000 times over. They exchanged rings, his a band of white gold that matched his pale skin, hers set with a single diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when Alexander leaned in to kiss his wife for the first time as her husband, the entire court erupted in applause. But the sound Alexander heard most clearly was Elena's delighted shout, "That's my daddy!" And this time, it was the absolute truth. The years that followed were not without challenges. Elena's existence as the adopted daughter of the Vampire King made her a figure of intense interest, both within vampire society and in the human world. Alexander had to carefully navigate her education, bringing in tutors who understood the unique position she occupied, teaching her about both worlds she now inhabited. There were security concerns always. Despite the Southern Court's punishment, there were still vampires who saw Alexander's human family as a weakness to be exploited. The estate's defenses were reinforced, guards were tripled, and both Willow and Elena learned basic self-defense techniques modified for supernatural threats. But there were also moments of breathtaking normalcy. Birthday parties where vampire nobility watched a human child blow out candles with bemused fascination. Family dinners where Elena would chatter about her lessons while Alexander and Willow exchanged fond glances. Quiet evenings in the library where all 3 of them would read. Elena pressed between her parents on the sofa, safe and warm and loved. On Elena's 8th birthday, Alexander officially adopted her. The ceremony was smaller than the wedding, just immediate court members and close friends. But the significance was enormous. When the papers were signed and the blood oath spoken, Elena became Elena Carstairs Dravonis, Princess of the Northern Court, daughter of a vampire king. Does this mean I'm a princess now? Elena asked, studying her new papers with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. It does, Alexander confirmed, crouching down to her level. But that doesn't change who you are, little one. You're still Elena, still brave and curious and kind. The title just makes it official, what you've always been mine. Elena threw her arms around his neck, and Alexander caught her easily, holding his daughter close. Over her head, he met Willow's eyes and saw his own joy reflected back at him. They had built something impossible here, something precious. A family that bridged 2 worlds bound together by love that transcended the boundaries of mortality and power. That night, after Elena was asleep and the guests had departed, Alexander and Willow stood together in the East Garden where it had all truly begun. The night-blooming jasmine was in full flower, filling the air with sweet perfume. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked quietly. Marrying me? Bringing Elena into this world? Willow turned to him, her expression fierce. Never. Not for a single moment. She'll age, he said, voicing the fear that haunted his quietest moments. She'll grow up, grow old, and I'll remain exactly as I am. I know. Willow took his hand, threading their fingers together. But that's years away, decades, and we'll face it together when the time comes. Right now, in this moment, she's happy and safe and loved. That's what matters. And you? Alexander asked. You'll age too. Your human life is so brief compared to mine. Then we make every moment count, Willow said simply. We love each other fiercely and completely for as long as we have. And when my time comes, I'll go knowing that I spent my life with someone who cherished me, who gave my daughter everything I couldn't provide alone. She smiled, touching his face. I'll go knowing I was loved by a king. Alexander kissed her palm, pressing his cold lips to her warm skin. I am the one who's been given a gift, Willow. You took a monster and made him a man. You and Elena both. You were always a man, Willow corrected gently. We just reminded you. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by impossible flowers and ancient magic, and Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries of existence. Complete, absolute peace. He had found his purpose, his family, his home, not in power or politics or endless existence, but in the love of a brave woman and the trust of a little girl who had once called him Daddy, without knowing how completely that word would change his entire world. Years continued to pass, marked by Elena's growth and the deepening bond between all 3 of them. When Elena was 12, she asked the question Alexander had been dreading. Daddy, why don't you get older? They were in his study, Elena doing homework while Alexander reviewed territorial disputes. The question hung in the air like smoke. You know why, he said carefully. We've talked about what I am. I know you're a vampire, but Mama ages. I age. Why don't you? Elena set down her pencil, looking at him with eyes that were far too perceptive for her age. And why doesn't Mama seem worried about it? Alexander exchanged a glance with Willow, who had entered the study carrying tea. They'd known this conversation was coming, had discussed how to handle it, but knowing something was inevitable didn't make it easier. Come here, both of you, Willow said, settling into one of the leather chairs. Elena and Alexander joined her, forming a small circle. Your father and I need to tell you something. Am I dying? Elena asked with the bluntness of youth, and both her parents immediately moved to reassure her. No, sweetheart, no, Willow said, pulling her daughter close. But there are things about our family that we need to discuss. Things about the future. Alexander took a breath he didn't need. When you're older, 18, an adult, you'll have a choice to make, Elena. A choice about what kind of life you want to live. What do you mean? Vampires can turn humans. Alexander explained carefully. It's a difficult process, and it's not taken lightly, but it is possible. When you're old enough to understand what you'd be giving up and what you'd be gaining, if you choose it, I could offer you immortality. You would become vampire, like me. Elena's eyes went wide. Really? I could be a vampire? You could, Willow said softly, but it's not a decision to make now. You need to live your human life first, understand what you'd be leaving behind. Go to school, make friends, experience all the normal things that humans experience. Then, when you're grown, you can decide. What about you, Mama? Elena asked. Will you become a vampire too? Willow smiled, and there was something bittersweet in it. I've thought about it. Your father and I have discussed it many times, and yes, someday I think I will, but not yet. I want to experience my human years fully, want to be here for you as a human mother while you're growing up. Does that make sense? Elena nodded slowly, processing this influx of information. So we won't have to say goodbye, none of us? Not if you don't want to, Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. I will never force this choice on you, Elena, but if you want it, if you want to stay with us forever, that option will exist. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, with the simple clarity that only children possessed, I want to stay with you both forever. You're my family. Alexander felt something in his chest crack open, felt love pour through him like sunlight breaking through centuries of darkness. And you are ours, little one, always. They held each other in the study, 3 beings who had no logical reason to be a family, but who had become one anyway, bound by love that transcended mortality and blood. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, in the warm glow of lamplight, the Dravonis family held each other and knew that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. Elena's teenage years brought the expected rebellion and unexpected complications. She was human growing up in a vampire world, princess of a court that she couldn't fully be part of until she chose transformation. She struggled with her identity, with belonging, with the weight of expectations from both worlds. But through it all, Aleksandr and Willow remained constant. They supported her through difficult friendships and harder questions about mortality. They helped her navigate human school while also teaching her vampire politics. They gave her space to be angry and confused, and they were there when she needed comfort. On Elena's 18th birthday, Aleksandr took her to the East Garden, where he'd first shown her the night-blooming flowers 14 years ago. She was a young woman now, tall and confident, with her mother's warm eyes and her own fierce spirit. "You don't have to decide today," he said as they walked among the jasmine. "You don't have to decide ever if you don't want to. Your mother and I love you regardless of what you choose." "I know," Elena said softly, "but I've known my answer for a long time, Daddy. I've just been waiting until I was old enough to say it and have it matter." Aleksandr stopped walking, turning to face her. "What answer is that?" Elena smiled, and it was radiant. "I want to be vampire. I want to be like you. I want to stay with you and Mama forever." She took his hand, holding it between both of hers. "You gave me everything when you didn't have to. You protected me, loved me, made me feel special and safe and cherished. You became my father when you could have just been a king, and I want—" Her voice broke slightly. "I want to honor that. I want to be part of this family in every way possible." Aleksandr pulled her into his arms, holding his daughter close as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I'm certain," Elena said firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The transformation took place 3 months later, after extensive preparation and education about what Elena would experience. Willow held her daughter's hand through the entire process, and Aleksandr performed the ritual with a care and precision born of 3 centuries of knowledge. When Elena woke 3 days later with pale skin and silver white hair, with strength and speed that made her gasp with wonder, the first thing she did was hug her parents and whisper, "Thank you." A year after that, Willow underwent the same transformation. She was 43, still young by human standards, but ready to leave mortality behind. Ready to walk beside her husband and daughter for all the endless years ahead. And so the family that began with a mistake with the little girl calling a vampire king daddy became something permanent and unbreakable. They were bound now not just by love, but by blood, by immortality, by the shared eternity stretching before them. Decades passed. The estate remained a center of power in the vampire world, but it also became something warmer, something that felt like home. Elena grew into her role as princess, becoming known for her diplomatic skills and her fierce protection of both human and vampire rights. Willow became an advisor to the court, her human perspective offering insights that centuries-old vampires often missed. And Aleksandr, who had once been known only for his cold authority, became recognized as something more, a king who ruled with both strength and compassion, whose greatest achievement was not his political power, but the family he'd chosen to build. On the 50th anniversary of that first meeting in the throne room, Aleksandr stood in the East Garden with his wife and daughter, surrounded by night-blooming jasmine that had witnessed their entire journey. They were all vampire now, all pale-skinned and immortal, but the love between them remained utterly, beautifully human. "Do you remember?" Willow asked, her voice warm with nostalgia. "When Elena grabbed your leg and wouldn't let go?" "I remember wanting to correct her so badly," Aleksandr admitted, his arm around his wife's waist. "I remember thinking it was a complication I didn't need." Elena laughed. "But you didn't correct me. You let me keep calling you Daddy even though it was wrong." "It wasn't wrong," Aleksandr said softly, looking between the 2 most important people in his existence. "It was the most right thing that's ever happened to me. You both were the greatest gift I never knew I needed." The vampire king brought low by a 4-year-old with good instincts, Willow teased, and Aleksandr found himself grinning. She did have good instincts. She saw through 3 centuries of carefully maintained distance and decided I was worth loving anyway. He pulled them both close, these 2 miracles who had transformed his endless existence into something worth living. "I would spend 1,000 lifetimes earning that trust." "You already have," Elena said simply. You became my father the moment you chose to be kind instead of correct. Everything else was just making it official." They stood together in the garden as night deepened around them. 3 vampires who were also a family, bound by love that had started with a child's innocent mistake and grown into something eternal. The flowers bloomed, the stars wheeled overhead, and in the heart of the Northern Court's most powerful estate, the Dravonis family held each other and knew that they had found something rarer than immortality, more precious than power. They had found home, and they would have forever to cherish it. Years stretched into decades, decades into centuries, and still the Dravonis family remained at the heart of the Northern Court. Elena eventually married a vampire diplomat named Cassius Thornhaven, and Alexander found himself in the unexpected position of being a grandfather when Elena and Cassius adopted human children of their own, continuing the family tradition of bridging 2 worlds. Willow became known throughout the vampire world as the Queen Who Remembered, her unique perspective as a former human making her invaluable in negotiations between vampire courts and human governments. She never lost her warmth, her fierce protectiveness, or her ability to make Alexander laugh when the weight of centuries threatened to make him cold again. But the core of everything remained the same. On quiet evenings, when the court was empty and the estate was still, Alexander would often find himself in the East Garden with his wife and daughter, listening to the song of night-blooming flowers and remembering the beginning of their impossible story. "I was so scared that day," Willow admitted once, centuries after that first meeting. "When Elena grabbed you, I thought you would be angry. Thought we'd both be thrown out or worse." "I should have been angry," Alexander mused. "By all rights, I should have corrected her immediately, should have established boundaries." "But you didn't," Elena said, her hand finding his. She was a grown woman now, centuries old in vampire years, but still his little girl in all the ways that mattered. "You chose compassion over protocol. You chose us over convenience." "I chose love," Alexander corrected softly, "though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I just knew that when you called me Daddy, something in my dead heart remembered how to beat." Willow leaned against his shoulder, her presence a constant warmth despite their shared vampire chill. "Do you ever regret it? The complication we brought into your perfectly ordered existence?" Alexander turned to look at her, at the woman who had taught him that forever was only meaningful when you had someone to share it with. Then he looked at Elena, at the daughter who had chosen him as surely as he had chosen her. Around them, the garden bloomed eternal, a testament to beauty that thrived in darkness. "Regret?" he said finally, his voice rough with emotion that 3 centuries of immortality had only deepened. "How could I regret the 2 of you? You taught me that family isn't about blood or birthright or ancient lineage. It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love, choosing to protect, choosing to be present. You both chose me when you had no reason to, and I chose you because my existence would have been meaningless without you in it." He pulled them both close. These 2 miracles who had transformed him from a king into a father, from a ruler into a man capable of love that transcended mortality itself. "A little girl called me Daddy in a throne room 50 years ago," he continued, "and I couldn't correct her, didn't want to correct her, because even then some part of me knew that she was right, that you were both exactly what I needed, even if I had spent 3 centuries pretending I needed nothing at all." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, and Willow laced her fingers through his, and in the garden where it had all begun, the Dravonis family stood together under ancient stars. They had forever stretching ahead of them all the time in the world to continue building the impossible, beautiful life they'd created. But in that moment, forever was simply, now, 3 vampires who were also a family, bound by love that had begun with a mistake and transformed into something eternal. The flowers sang their night song. The moon rose silver and full, and in the heart of the Northern Court, a vampire king who had once believed himself incapable of love, held his wife and daughter close and knew that he had finally, after centuries of searching, found exactly where he belonged. Home was not a place. It was not power or position or ancient bloodlines. Home was here, in the arms of the people who had chosen to love him despite everything he was and everything he wasn't. Home was a maid who had trusted him with her daughter's heart and eventually with her own. Home was a little girl who had looked at a vampire king and seen, not a monster, but a father waiting to be claimed. Home was love. And the vampire king, who had spent 3 centuries believing he didn't need it, had learned the most important lesson of his long existence. Love was not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that made forever worth living. So when Elena whispered, "I love you, Daddy," the same words she'd said countless times over the past 50 years, Alexander answered the same way he always did, with 3 words that meant everything. "I love you too, little one, forever." And in the garden, where night-blooming flowers sang their eternal song, the family that should never have existed celebrated the only thing that truly mattered. They had found each other, they had chosen each other, and they would have forever to continue being exactly what they had always been, a family.